Hi everybody, this is Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the December My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. For this layout, I'm using a cut file from My Creative Scrapbook, and I'm going to be backing it with some pattern papers. There are a number of Christmas trees in this cut file, which you'll see in a little while, and for the Christmas trees, I wanted to create a layered look using some punched out pieces of paper from the kit. I used 3 different punches to create some strips of paper to layer together to make my trees. On my mat is a Martha Stewart punch. That's a scalloped punch with a little bit of a decoration in it, and there's even a little bit of embossing in that punch as well. To the right of my mat is a Fisker's punch. That's a small, kind of delicate scallop punch. And then in the very left-hand bottom corner, you can see a little bit of another Fisker's punch that I have, and that's also a scallop, but there's a hole punched out of the center of each of the sections of the scallop. I'm layering these strips of paper starting from the bottom on top of the inner cut of the cut file. So that's the piece of paper that comes out of the cut file that generally I would throw away, but in this case I thought it would be perfect to use as a base for all of these punched out paper strips. And before I began gluing these strips down, I inked the edges of all of them with some Distress Oxides. You could see them on my mat right now. So I continued layering the strips on top of each other until I got to the top of the tree. If you use the same method that I used, where you use the paper from inside the cut file to mount strips of paper on, you have to leave a little bit of a border. You can't cut the paper all the way down to the edge of the template. You have to leave a little bit of extra because you need something to apply glue to in order for it to stay on the cut file. So I think you could see here, I put some glue on the cut file, and then when I attached the tree down, it was those little pieces that came past the edges of the cutout tree that were glued down to the back of the cut file. I hope that makes sense. And I didn't use the same layered strips on all of the trees. For 3 of the trees, I punched out the strips and I applied them in the same way that I just showed you. And then for the 2 other trees, they're the larger trees, I just backed the cut file in the regular way using a couple of different pattern papers. And if you use punches like I did that had some cutouts in them, you want to make sure that your strips are rather wide. That way you won't see the white paper behind those open spots. You want to have green behind those open spaces and not white. And if you don't have enough paper or if you forget to make them wide, you can always cut out a little piece of pattern paper and glue that behind those openings so that you won't see the white paper. And you could see on this tree that I remembered to leave a border all around the outside so that I could easily glue this tree down to my cut file. So I glued this tree down and then I made the backing for the one more remaining tree. And then I did some stitching on the cut file, and you'll see that in a little while. Now, I had already saved this piece of pattern paper for another idea, but when I was trying to find a paper that I thought the cut file would look nice on top of, I just had to use this paper. It looked so nice with the cut file layered on top because the background is rather dark, and I loved the green and red plaid. So I trimmed the paper down approximately 1/4 of an inch on each side. I used a corner rounder to round the edges of it, and I'm going to mount it on a piece of white cardstock. When I use a cut file, I often like to mount the background paper on some white cardstock. That way there's a white border and it kind of goes along with the white edge of the cut file. Here's my cut file. I used some glitter thread and I stitched around all of the letters. I also stitched around the inside of the 3 stars that are on the cut file. And the glitter thread is a little bit challenging to work with. I'm not sure why it's so hard to work with, but I definitely think it was worth it because I love the little bit of shimmer that this adds to the layout. I don't know if you could really see that here, but it definitely makes an impact in person. The thread really catches the light really nicely. I'm using my T-square to make sure that this cut file is on there straight. You can see I'm double checking because I have been known at times to attach a cut file down crooked and then it has to be fixed, and so I definitely want to avoid that. So I'm going to use 2 photos of my daughters. I am mounting one of them on a red mat and the other one on a white mat. I end up changing my mind though. I don't really like the one photo on one color mat and the other photo on the other color, so I ended up just cutting out a white mat for both of them, and I think that that will work out better, although right now I'm going to stick with that red mat for a little while. I just switched the mats because I wanted to use the white mat on the right-hand side of the layout, and I thought that the photo that I had originally put on the red mat looked better on that spot between the trees, so I switched them, and now I'm using some adhesive to attach them down to the background. There was a piece of pattern paper in this kit that was a whole sheet of poinsettias. They were white and blue poinsettias. And so since I had some left after using a whole bunch of them to make a layout that had a wreath on it, I thought that these would look really nice tucked into the edges of the Christmas trees on this layout. And I was thinking that the blue color in the poinsettias would tie together with the blue that's in the title Christmas Fun. So these are all of the poinsettias that I have left, and I ended up using every last one of them on this layout. I really love using poinsettias on my Christmas layouts, and I love the way these were blue and white. It was a little bit different than your traditional red poinsettias, although I like those too. Initially, I was planning on tucking the poinsettias just around the edges of the Christmas trees, but then as I was adding them to the layout, I decided to add some by both of the photos, and I also added a couple at the bottom of the layout by the title. As I mentioned, I had already cut out these poinsettias, planning to use them on another layout. These are some extras. So the edges of the poinsettias were already inked in most cases. I used a Distress Oxide called Stormy Sky. It seemed to be the perfect color to match the blue color on the poinsettias. And then once I was happy with where I had all the poinsettias, I used some ATG adhesive and I attached them down to the layout. I guess I had a couple more poinsettias. Either I hadn't cut them out or I didn't realize that I had these. So these poinsettias did not have the edges inked. So I went back in with my dauber and inked all of these edges. And I also inked the edges of a die cut bow that I put on the photo that's on the bottom portion of the layout. And then I attached that bow down to the bottom of one of my photos. Something that I love to add to my cut files is strips of 3mm self-adhesive pearls. I get those from the Eyelet and Brad outlet, and I found that I didn't have any left. And I was very upset because I thought I had a whole bunch of them, but I guess I used them a lot more than I realized. So I had to place an order and hope that the pearls would arrive in time, and luckily they did. So I am putting a little bit of glossy accents around the outside of the white mat, and then I'm placing those strips of pearls on top. I find that these strips of pearls will stay put if I put them in a straight line, but as soon as I start trying to curve them around anything, especially a circle, I find that later on they kind of pop up a little bit. So I've learned that glossy accents will hold them down permanently. So now I make sure that I start with glossy accents. I don't wait for them to pop up. And sorry if you've heard this before, I've been raving about this little tiny bottle of glossy accents. For years and years, I used the big bottles and they were always getting clogged. And I find that this little bottle is either not clogging or very easy to unclog if it does clog, if I leave the top off for too long. So I bought this little bottle at a scrapbook convention, and if I see another one, I'm going to pick it up and I'll leave that in my scrapbooking room. The one that I have right now, I have that upstairs on my scrapbooking table that I use on a regular basis. And then maybe I can refill them with those larger bottles of glossy accents that I have. I'm not sure about that yet. I cut the sentiment that says Holly Jolly from one of the branding strips. I inked the edge and then I put some foam on the back to give it a little bit of dimension. And unfortunately, it did not record, but I added a number of jewels on those larger trees. I have red, green, blue, and clear jewels in a pattern going down the trees. There were already some lines to follow on the cut file. And then for the other trees that I used those layered border strips on, I used some very inexpensive faceted jewels in different shades of green, and I added those to the little sections of the scallops. I have a couple of different sizes, so I varied the color and the size of the jewels as I added them, just to make them look a little bit more interesting. And my daughter and I got this big sheet of jewels at this store that sells Amazon returns. I have mentioned that in one of my other videos. And we've been getting so much use out of these jewels. She's used it for her crafting. I've used it for my crafting. And it was just a really good buy because it had a whole bunch of different colors in a lot of different sizes. And I love to use jewels on my layouts, so I'm really happy to find such small size jewels in such a great quantity. There were 3 stars at the tops of 3 of the trees on the layout, and I wanted to add something to them. And I found that I had some stars in a couple of different sizes in red, and so I added one of those stars to each of the ones on the cut file. For the 2 trees that didn't have any stars at the top, I added some silver stars that I got on clearance at Hobby Lobby. And then I used the same silver stars on the R and the A of the title. It just looked like I needed a little something in those spots, and I think that that silver star was just the right size. And then I wanted to add some splatters to the background, but I didn't want to get paint all over the trees. I just wanted the splatters to go in the background. So I used some papers to cover up the trees and the photos, and I began adding some splatters to the background. I did a little bit of authentic splattering, and then to make sure that I had white spots or splatters in quotes in all of the places that I wanted them, I dabbed a couple of white spots on using the straw that goes inside of the paint container. So through a combination of splattering and dabbing, I got white spots in all the places that I wanted them on the background. And when I either got splatters in places I didn't want them or I didn't like the way the splatters looked, I quickly rubbed them away. That's a little risky though, because sometimes you could still see traces of the white paint, but I don't think that it was too noticeable in the couple of spots where I did that. Here I'm using the straw and I'm putting a couple of dots in between the letters of the cut file. I just wanted to make sure there were some splatters in those areas too. So those white splatters finish off this layout, and here are some close-ups. I want to say thank you to all of my scrapbooking friends who watch my videos. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch them, and I really hope that you enjoy watching them. I also want to say thank you so much to all of you wonderful ladies who are always leaving me these really sweet, very encouraging comments. I cannot thank you enough. If I'm ever feeling discouraged, I just read those comments and they really brighten my day. Thank you so much. As you may know if you've been watching my channel, I am absolutely in love with the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. You can purchase a subscription by going to the My Creative Scrapbook website. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.